Mics. There we go. Thank you.
Hi. Mics. Yes, they're important. Hey, welcome to All the Things, the show where we talk about all the things related to God, life, and the Bible from a historically Christian worldview perspective. Yes, got to throw that in there. My name is Monique Duson, and you are?
I am Krista Bontrager.
Still?
Apparently.
Okay.
Also known as Theology Mom. And I'm glad to be here. And go find Monique, the real Monique D, on Twitter.
Yes.
Maybe she'll tweet something. Maybe we can get you up to like 10 followers this week.
Maybe. I think I'm at 6 right now. Yeah.
You're doing big things.
I am, but I don't really tweet anything.
Okay.
But if someone follows me, if a new person follows me this week, then I will tweet something this week.
Okay.
All right.
And helping us on the show this week and every week is Mr. Wonderful, Bob Bontrager, the official button pusher.
Hello.
And Abby, then her green hair and her green pony. Turn around, Abby.
What?
Say
What? Pay attention.
the teenager monitoring our chat box. And we do want to also acknowledge the events of the day happening in El Paso and praying for the families and who are going through such horrible tragedy at the moment.
Yeah, it's quite devastating. Oddly enough, we were at Walmart earlier today here in California and shot our promo video there without knowing anything that was happening there.
We came home hours later to the news.
Yeah.
So
just keeping them in our thoughts and our prayers, and it's
very
very
sobering.
tragic situation.
And we do want to remind everyone, if you missed the show last week, we had Dr. Mark Clark on to talk about UFOs and the Facebook event that is coming out in Area 51. Mm-hmm. And he broke down all the things about UFOs and contactee experiences. It was a really good conversation. He's a military intelligence specialist.
Yes, and alien encounters of the third kind. I didn't know it was a movie, but there is a movie and there's a third kind. And so, check out the show and you'll learn all about the third kind and maybe a fourth kind.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
All the things that happened before you were born.
Yes.
And one of our viewers, though, responded to our social justice segment that we did last week. I was wondering
We've had quite a few.
Yeah. We actually had a lot of interaction about the social justice segment. Maybe we can get that note. There we go. This person said, one of our viewers says, by the way, I think my church has the opposite problem. We talked about the conflation of social justice and the gospel at times. And I was really trying to emphasize the gospel part of it. And her church is more, she says, doing a lot of social justice stuff and under the banner of outreach to those in need. But she says, I hardly hear or witness the sharing of the actual gospel. We're not bringing to people in Christ. We may be watering seeds, but there is no harvest. And so I thought that was an interesting observation.
I think it is an interesting observation. And it's also interesting to see what happens when you're not sharing the gospel and that the social justice message is not the gospel.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
So if you missed our show last week, we want to encourage you to go
check it out. Yes.
And the show notes that are there on the website, theologymom.com/all the things.
All the things.
And they can get some follow-up resources and all of that fun stuff. Okay, So we better do the show rundown.
Yes, quickly. Okay, so this week we are talking about transhumanism. It is not what I thought it was. Yes.
We're looking into the future a bit.
Looking into the future a bit, yes. Transhumanism talks about the evolving of humanity, the evolving of humans, and
kind of the next stage in human evolution, if you will.
We have Dr. Fuz Rana on, and he is a scientist and he's very smart. He's like a biochemist.
That's
there
right.
we go, because I will mess it all up. And he also is vice president at Reasons to Believe.
Yep.
And he really cool guy. And he's very nice.
Author on a new book on transhumanism called Humans 2.0.
Yes.
And so we're going to talk about that. I think what's really cool about what their Fuz and his co-author Ken Samples are doing is looking at it from a distinctly Christian perspective. This is an emerging technology. Many of our viewers may not have ever heard of transhumanism, but trust me, the emerging generation is going to be confronted with this. So it'll be a really important conversation for us to have with our kids and our teenagers.
I just think it's a really important space for the Christian voice to be in. As I listened to some videos and did some research, I was like, we should definitely be speaking into this.
Yeah. And later in the show, we're going to talk about tolerance. What is it really?
Yeah.
And is it biblical? And what does it mean to be tolerant? So such a
really
big,
tolerant.
Yeah, such a big buzzword in our culture today. So
it is.
Try to break that down. And
we're live in the chat box.
Yeah.
Hit us up on Facebook, hit us in the YouTube chat, and ask us your questions. Let us know your thoughts. We are glad that you're here and joining us.
All righty. So make sure we've done. All right, let's get into it. Let's start talking about transhumanism. Let's get our friend Dr. Fuz Rana on with us. Hey, Fuz.
Hey, ladies, how are you doing this evening?
Good.
This is what we do for fun on a Saturday night.
Hey, my idea of a good time.
That's right. So Fuz has graciously come on. He works with me at Reasons to Believe. He's the vice president of research and apologetics there, and the author of the new book Humans 2.0 with Kenneth Samples. And I also want to let people know just a little bit about his background. He holds a PhD in chemistry with an emphasis in biochemistry from Ohio University. Used to be a researcher at Procter & Gamble. Listening to Fuz's Procter & Gamble stories is one of my favorite hobbies. And we're excited to talk to you about Humans 2.0, Fuz. Now, this book we've been saying is about the emerging movement that's called transhumanism, but I know that term's going to be new for many of our viewers. So maybe you could just start us off with giving us kind of a basic definition of what is transhumanism.
Yes.
Yeah, well, transhumanism is this idea that we should use science and technology to enhance human beings, to augment human beings beyond our biological limits, beyond our biological capabilities. So that transhumanists would argue that we actually have an obligation to, again, use science and technology to make human beings smarter, more psychologically well-adjusted, to make us stronger. And the idea is that human beings, being the product of an evolutionary history, are fundamentally flawed, and that we can go in and use technology to correct these flaws, and in doing so, mitigate quite a bit of human pain and suffering in the world, promote human progress and human flourishing, with an eye towards trying to create some type of utopian future that is undergirded by technological progress. But also, of course, one of the biggest challenges facing any human being is the fact that our lifespan is finite. And so people believe that with transhumanism, we could actually extend human life expectancy, perhaps even attain some form of immortality. And so this is where transhumanism moves from the arena of science and philosophy into almost a religious area, where ultimately transhumanism is a mode for salvation. And so there is, in effect, a gospel message that is being proclaimed by transhumanists. It's an alternative to the Christian gospel, but it's a gospel where people look to science and technology for salvation as opposed to the person of Christ. And so this is an idea that is becoming incredibly prominent within the academy, and it is very quickly filtering into our culture, and it's soon going to be something that will be part of the day-to-day discourse in our culture. It'll be a reality that'll be upon us. And I think it's going to be one of the chief, if not the chief competitors to the Christian gospel in the next decade or so.
So it's kind of a theory of an extension of human evolution, that we can evolve humanity beyond our current physical and mental limitations by using science and technology, and even begin to use these this augmentation. A lot of it is kind of, from what I understand, body augmentation, that we can actually overcome certain obstacles. Maybe you could give us a couple of examples of what are some good applications that you see on the future for transhumanism.
Yeah, and this idea of transhumanism actually has been around for quite some time. Its genesis traces back probably to the early 1900s in a book published by J.B.S. Haldane, a famous British geneticist, called The Atlas, where he anticipates what our insight into genetics could actually lead to. And he argues that through the use of applied genetics, which today we would call genetic engineering, we could actually reshape humanity. And this idea was fodder for science fiction in the 1960s, when our culture became more oriented around technology. There was a newer version of transhumanism that emerged, but it was always considered a fringe idea. And it's moved into the mainstream thanks to advances, for example, in CRISPR gene editing, which is a technique that allows for high precision gene editing of the genomes of organisms, including the human genome. And this technique is extremely powerful, but it's inexpensive and very easy to use. And so this is going to lead to another revolution in molecular biology and in genomics, but it's going to be a revolution where we have the toolkit now to take control of the evolution of any organism that we want, where we can, in very short order, transform life forms and fundamentally alter their genetic material. And so people see this as a very powerful technology that could treat a lot of diseases that are caused from genetic disorders, for which there's currently no really good treatment whatsoever. And some people even believe that if you apply this technique systematically at the embryo stage, we could actually eliminate genetic disorders from the human gene pool, or radically reduce the occurrence of these genetic disorders from the human gene pool. And so this is a technique that has a lot of ethical issues centered around applying it from a biomedical standpoint, but could be an incredibly powerful technique that could literally change medicine in the next decade, where we could actually treat, again, a lot of serious genetic disorders through the use of the technology. But it then becomes a stepping stone to things like developing designer babies, where we would not only, treat human beings because of genetic disorders, but could we actually go to the embryonic stage and alter the human genome to make that child stronger physically or intellectually more capable than even it would be a natural normative biological range of, for strength or intelligence that human beings would see. And so once you start doing that, you now are moving into a technology that would really be in line with what transhumanists want to achieve. And transhumanists would argue we have an obligation to explore how this technology could be used to enhance human beings.
So where would we see this, like, in just regular day-to-day stuff? Is this out there among, like, even subtly among normal people in pop culture? Is this something that I would, not knowing anything about biochemistry, have been made aware of?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you are into science fiction at all, the idea of using technology to augment human beings is, really very much part of science fiction. In fact, if people in our culture today, including me, are fascinated with superheroes. And so you have, for example, because Steve Rogers, he is an example of, he's a super soldier that was given some kind of injection that altered him in such a way that he becomes this super soldier type of character. Well, that's an example of the type of thing a transhumanist would advocate on a broad scale. To me, the quintessential transhumanist superhero would be Tony Stark or Iron Man, where he's just a normal person who then is able, through the use of technology, put on armor or don armor that then makes him superhuman. And so we're interacting with ideas that are part of the transhumanist vision all the time in our culture, whether we realize it or not. And I think science fiction and fantasy has done two things. One is it's actually poised us to have some good, I think, intellectually informed conversations as a culture at large about the risks and the rewards of a transhumanist vision. But also it has inoculated us from this idea seeming bizarre to an idea that we are already comfortable with because of our exposure to science fiction.
One of our viewers was kind of anticipating where you're going there, Fuz. Kimba says, is that, I think this is why they keep putting out so many superhero movies. Is it to indoctrinate young people? Maybe another way of saying that is it to kind of desensitize us to this transhumanist vision? Do you see any relevance to that? I know you're a comic book nerd.
Yeah,
so.
I am. Well, the thing is, this is maybe a great topic for another program, but we can explore this a little bit since Kimba asked. I've been fascinated with the superhero phenomena for a number of reasons. One is, I am a bit of a comic book nerd because I had comic books when I was a kid. That when I was a kid, that was really when Marvel began to launch a lot of its titles. And so I was seeing the very early days of many of the iconic Marvel heroes, because many of them were developed in the 1960s. And so I've been fascinated with these superhero movies in terms of how are these movie producers going to translate these comic books onto the screen, and they've done an incredibly marvelous job. But there's something about superheroes that resonates deeply with human beings. And I think as we become increasingly secular in our culture, human beings are fulfilling the role of our moral instructors. They're providing us essentially these gods that are examples to us, whether we realize it or not. How many of us are familiar with the expression from Spider-Man, with much power comes much responsibility, right? That's a moral truism of sorts that is actually biblical, right? For who's been given much, much is expected. And so that's part of, I think, the appeal of comic books. Another part of the appeal is that it's this grand drama where good is taking on evil. And there's a literary scholar named Ben Sanders who argues that comic books are actually a theodicy, where it's essentially an exploration of the problem of evil and gives people a place where they can fantasize about what would it be like if I had superpowers? How would I use those superpowers? What could I do to change the world? How could I make that which is wrong right? That we realize intuitively that there's really something wrong about the world, and that we want to be able to step in and do something about it. And so comic books allow us to fulfill that fantasy. And so there's a lot of reasons why people are enthralled with comic books. And I think it's in part because it hits to the core of who we are and is identifying a need that we have as human beings. But on top of that, comic books are a place where, particularly thanks to Marvel, where a lot of themes that our culture is engaging are played out in the pages of comics, where it becomes a place for social commentary, and where people are even where the writers of comic book stories are even shaping the opinion of the next generation as they explore, again, some of these social issues. So it's a very powerful medium.
I think storytelling is a powerful medium. It's a powerful way of conveying ideas, even like the transhumanism idea that comes through in the comic book world, through the science fiction world, that it does help us begin to conceive of a world where we could almost be superhuman and we could make changes. One of our viewers, Fuz, is asking Rhyme His Songs, who's a frequent weekly viewer, says, Dr. Rana, are you saying that chromosomal deficiencies like mental retardation can be mitigated or reversed in the womb? What about spina bifida or cerebral palsy? Is that part of what transhumanism is proposing?
Yes, something along those lines. Now, when it comes to things that are chromosomal deformities, those are going to be very difficult to correct with the current CRISPR technology. It's going to be more useful for treating things like cystic fibrosis, where it's a mutation to a single gene that then has, very broad ramifications, with the idea being that we could go in a child or an adult patient, deliver the CRISPR gene editing package to lung cells targeting specific tissues in the body, where the gene editing package would go in and actually alter the defective gene and replace it with a healthy gene, so that then the symptoms of cystic fibrosis would be mitigated. Now, a more extreme example would be screening embryos, and this gets into a lot of ethical issues. Screening embryos looking for the cystic fibrosis defect, and this would be if you knew that one of the parent or both parents were carriers of that genetic defect, and then correcting that defect in the embryo, and through this use, then the child will grow up without having any genetics, where all the genes ideally would be free of this genetic defect, or all the cells in the body would be free of this genetic defect. And so so that would be a way in which you would treat a genetic disorder. But the idea there is that, again, with certain types of genetic disorders that typically right now involve a mutation to a single gene, you could use CRISPR gene editing for treatment. Now, another thing that you could do for somebody that is suffering, let's say, from a more extreme type of genetic disorder that maybe involves limited mobility or things like that, you might be able to, through the use of other technologies, like, let's say, computer-brain interface technology, actually help that person, though they may still have, let's say, the symptoms of cerebral palsy, to overcome those symptoms through the use of computer-brain interface technology that allows the patient, through that interface, to control with their thoughts the operation of computer software, computer hardware, and through that then maybe gain control of things like exoskeletons with their thoughts and things like that.
Fuz, how close are we to actually seeing this technology among us? Like, is it like something in our hopes and dreams, like way off, 50, 60, 70 years from now? Or is it, in the next 5 to 10 years? Or are we actually like implementing some of these ideas currently today?
I think the answer to those questions is yes to all of them. I mean, for example, there are already preclinical studies underway right now using CRISPR gene editing to treat genetic disorders. And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, CRISPR gene editing is so inexpensive and so powerful to use that literally you can go on to Amazon and for $175 approximately order a CRISPR gene editing kit that you can have delivered probably the next day to your house, and you could go on your kitchen counter and do some relatively basic gene editing experiments where you would alter the genome of, let's say, a yeast cell. And so one classic example would be incorporating the gene for the green fluorescent protein into the genome of yeast cell, a brewer's yeast, and then you could use that brewer's yeast to brew beer that would be green. And this is actually something that you can purchase as a kit on Amazon. And the point I'm making here is it's that easy to use that somebody could actually do this gene editing on their kitchen counter. And so there are already people that are exploring, for example, the use of CRISPR gene editing to disable a gene called that codes for a protein called myostatin. And this is a protein that controls muscle growth. And if you disable the myostatin gene, you now have uncontrolled muscle growth. And so people have experimented with dogs, and you can see pictures online. These dogs look kind of like an Arnold Schwarzenegger version of a dog. They're just almost grotesque in terms of how extensive or expansive their musculature is. Well, we're really steps away from somebody refining that technique to use for human beings, so that somebody that would be an athlete could actually use myostatin as a way to enhance their muscle growth and their athletic performance. So this is really something that could be literally years away from actually being available in a mainstream capacity. In terms of computer-brain interfaces, the advances, again, are incredible. These advances are already seeing preclinical application. There's lots of stories that we see about people using computer-brain interfaces to treat people that are locked in, to allow amputees to control robotic limbs, still very much in the experimental stage. This is going to be extremely expensive technology to matriculate to a clinical setting, but I would imagine within a decade, there are going to be people who will be treated with computer-brain interfaces, allowing them to overcome things like immobility due to, spinal cord injuries, or people that are locked in because of stroke or brain injuries.
And when you talk about locked in, just to clarify, you mean people who can think but don't have the ability to speak or move their limbs?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Okay. And then you also mentioned that this could be something used by athletes. Is there any kind of like ethical regulations on any of this?
No, this is the thing that is a little frightening, is that the advances are happening at such a breakneck pace that it's impossible at this point to really regulate what's happening in these areas. Now, with the CRISPR gene editing, the scientific community has actually kind of on a voluntary basis put together guidelines to help guide the work of researchers in this area. But adherence to those guidelines is strictly voluntary. It's not anything that any type of government agency is actually giving any oversight to. And again, the technology is progressing so fast that it's impossible to have proper ethical deliberation before the technology progresses beyond the point where that ethical deliberation is no longer relevant or meaningful. So it's a very serious concern in the fact that it's simply not regulated. Now I can imagine, some kind of sports agencies prohibiting the use of gene editing to enhance athletes. But again, it's really, in that sense, it's really kind of a voluntary type of regulation, or it's a regulation that's localized to, a particular body. But I mean, there's nothing to stop somebody from setting up a lab in some place in the world and developing, again, gene editing techniques designed specifically for human enhancements. And people that are wealthy enough could actually begin to make use of them as a way to, enhance their intellectual or their physical well-being, and again, to try to extend their life expectancy.
The chat box is very busy right now, Fuz. Just want to work in a few comments here. People, I think, are still wrestling with trying to get the picture of what all is involved with transhumanism. Is it like the Borg on Star Trek, where you have kind of part human and then part body augmentation with technology? Is this, one of our viewers asked, how does this mix? Is it like artificial intelligence and a physical strength enhancer? If your heart's a muscle, could that be enhanced? So people are still kind of grappling with trying to get a picture on what the transhumanism really is. This is new information for many of us.
Yeah, well, and I can appreciate the confusion, because in a sense, the goal of transhumanists is to take control of our evolution with, again, science and technology, altering human beings. But there's essentially a palette of options that are going to be available in the future that are increasingly coming online.
So it's kind of all of those in some
Yes.
sense.
So in a sense, you would have essentially a menu of options available to you. And so you could enhance based on, what technology works the best and what is it that you actually want. And so actually transhumanists think that we actually could evolve human beings into a new species, but it wouldn't be a single species, but really a range of what would be called post-human species, where there would be a collection of post-humans based on the nature of the transformation and the augmentation. So it's not just a single post-human species, but really a collection of post-human species.
This sounds, and one of our viewers actually mentioned that this sounds like it's something for the rich and the powerful. What would happen to the poor if this were to become, let's say, a worldview?
That is an excellent question. And, when it comes to, these emerging biotechnologies, I think in many respects, these are wonderful developments because they can be used to treat a number, again, of serious medical disorders. And so, but even then, there are ethical issues associated with all of these technologies. And one of the problems we're already seeing in medicine today is that medical treatments are increasingly becoming expensive. They're very powerful, very effective, but they're becoming expensive. And so we already are in a world where there are medical haves and have-nots. And even if you have insurance, if you have limitations in terms of your financial resources, or certain treatments that are not going to be readily available to you that would be available to somebody with the financial means. And so we already are beginning to see stratification in our culture, with those who have adequate medical care, those who don't, and those who do have access to medical care. Some people have better quality care than others. Now, as the technology gets more and more expensive, it is going to be those people that are rich, that are in a socioeconomic advantage, that are going to have access to these technologies for medical purposes, which means they're going to be at an advantage. But now if you start using the technology for enhancement, that problem becomes exacerbated. And so it's going to be those people that are rich, that are well-to-do, that are going to be able to benefit from this technology first and foremost. And then once they benefit from it, they're going to have even a greater advantage that's going to allow them to have greater financial resources and greater socioeconomic status, which in turn is going to allow them to benefit from ongoing advances. So we could literally see a world where there is a stratification of those who have and don't have access to this technology. And so this is one of the real ethical concerns, and it does relate to issues pertaining to justice, right? Where technology can actually be used to create injustices in the world. So in other words, this transhumanist vision may not really be readily available for every person.
So, Fuz, I want to go back to an earlier point that you made about what a challenge this could be to the Christian worldview and to the gospel. Let's explore that a little bit. And how do you see transhumanism potentially functioning as a worldview? And what claims does it make that could potentially compete with the Christian worldview?
Yeah. Well, I mean, people, and this isn't necessarily it's not necessarily all or none, but many people that are embracing transhumanism are materialists. They look at physical reality as being the sum total of all that there is. So the only thing that exists universe, natural, there is no immaterial. This is essentially the worldview that is largely undergirding the transhumanist movement. Now, there are some people who are religious who would embrace transhumanism. There's a Christian transhumanist movement. That's an entirely different beast. But anyway, And so the idea, if you're a materialist, is there really is no meaning or purpose or hope to human existence. And so it's a very despairing worldview if you think through the metaphysical implications of materialism. But along comes transhumanism, where technology now becomes the means to essentially escape death. It becomes the means by which we can extend our life expectancy, maybe even indefinitely. And now it suddenly gives hope in destiny and meaning and purpose to not only individuals, but to the human species in its totality. And so it really is, it's essentially an eschatology for materialism. So if you can think of human evolution replacing the Genesis 1 account for the origin of humanity and all the incumbent, metaphysical implications of embracing human evolution, as opposed to a biblical perspective of human origins, you now have transhumanism replacing essentially a Christian eschatology with a materialistic eschatology, where it's going to be science and technology delivering us and providing the mode for our salvation. And this is a very appealing gospel, because we already live in a world that is increasingly secular. We live in a world where there is increasing despair, I believe. We live in a world where people respect science and technology, and already turn to science and technology as the way in which we solve our problems. We're looking to technology to deliver us from the problems that we have. And we look to science to help improve our medical treatment, to deliver us from the physical pain and suffering that we struggle with. We look to technology in science to help us deal with our psychological wellness. And so we try to become stronger and healthier and live longer lifespans through, again, the application of science and technology. So we already are doing those types of things, and so it's the transhumanist vision is going to be something that people are going to, I think, subconsciously embrace as the way in which humanity is going to be saved. And there's some existential threats that we're facing as a human species related to climate change and things like that. And again, transhumanism very well may be the way for us to sidestep what would be otherwise human extinction due to some of these existential threats, where, again, technology may make us impervious to harsh climates that otherwise we wouldn't be able to survive in our current biological form, if you will.
So what I hear you saying is that with transhumanism comes a lot of good. There can be medical advancements and help for people who otherwise wouldn't have any resource or things like that to be able to move beyond their current physical condition. But there's also a lot that we need to be watching out for and be on guard for, especially as Christians and as we as a culture move forward. What are your hopes for transhumanism in the future?
Yeah, well, one of the things that Ken Samples and I do in the book is to point out, as you just have pointed out, that it's a very complex idea that really has complex ramifications, and that not everything that transhumanism is advocating is bad. There's a lot of good that is part of the transhumanist vision. Who doesn't want to see human beings flourish? Who doesn't want to see human progress? And science and technology are wonderful ways in which humans can flourish and humans can make progress. Who doesn't want to see pain and suffering mitigated? This, again, is a wonderful idea. Who doesn't want to see the world that we live in improve? And so these are good things with regard to transhumanism, but there's also a lot of ethical issues with the biomedical application of these technologies, with the use of these technologies for enhancements, and and one of the concerns that ethicists have is that transhumanism is creating categories which current secular versions of bioethics simply don't have the capacity to properly engage. And so you hear bioethicists calling for new ethical developments, new ethical systems to try to guide our decision making with regard to these technologies. And what Ken Samples and I point out in the book is that we don't need a new ethical system, but we need to return to an ancient ethical system that is part of the Christian worldview, that is organized around the concept that human beings bear God's image. And that is such a powerful idea because it essentially is saying that every human being has inherent worth and value, which means we have very strong motivation to promote human progress and flourishing, to mitigate pain and suffering. But we also recognize that we have to put in place safeguards to minimize or to even prevent human beings from being exploited through these technologies. We want to make sure that these technologies are equitable, that there's true justice in terms of implementing them. And this is something that the Christian worldview offers. But then on top of that, because we bear God's image, we've been granted dominion over the creation, which means that we have an obligation as part of our dominion, as part of serving as God's vice regents here on the planet, to develop science and technology and to drive these kind of developments. So with a Christian worldview, you have this unique framework that promotes the development of technologies, but also provides an effective means to guide the proper use of the technologies so that everybody can benefit and that the fewest number of people are exploited or disadvantaged because of that.
This is fascinating. I'm so glad you came on, Fuz. And once again, I want to make sure that people are aware of your book. We flashed it up there a couple of times, Humans 2.0 by Dr. Fuz Rana and Kenneth Samples. Fuz brings kind of the scientific expertise. Ken brings the philosophical and moral philosophy expertise. And I really think that this is probably one of the most important books in apologetics right now, helping us to think through something that is on the horizon, and that we need to be cognizant of this because this is going to have a major impact on our kids and their experiences and our people like us as we grow older. And so I just want to commend this book to everyone out there, especially if you have people in your life who work in the STEM fields. They're engineers, scientists, they work in high-tech industries. This is an issue that those people are aware of. And if you're trying to reach out to them and witness to them and bring the gospel to them, you need this book. You need to be grappling with these ideas. And if you have someone that you love in your life that has a scientific orientation, get connected to Reasons to Believe. You can just go right on their website at reasons.org and find out more about their important work, and that you can be sharing it with your friends and family. Get connected on their social media. Reasons to Believe is in my top 5 ministries that you're probably not following, but you should. So it's on my top 5 list on Facebook. So go follow all my friends at Reasons to Believe, especially Dr. Rana and Ken Samples, Hugh Ross, Jeff Swearing, AJ Roberts, and the ministry as a whole. There's just some incredibly valuable resources there. Thank you so much, Fuz, for being on with us.
Thank you.
Well,
So informative.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, that was fun.
That was.
We got to look into the future a little bit.
Yes. I'm going to order me a Wonder Woman kit on Amazon. Hopefully I can find it for $19.95. Because yes.
You're going to be doing those experiments at our kitchen table?
Yes.
All
You'll
right.
wake up tomorrow, I'll be like a black Wonder Woman. I don't even know. Do they have a black Wonder Woman?
They should.
They should.
Yes.
Yeah, I can totally do that.
We should ask Fuz. He is the comic book nerd.
Yeah, I don't really do science.
I don't either. I don't even.
Scientific.
I don't know what that is.
What is it?
So tell me some takeaways that you got from from that conversation.
That I can be Wonder Woman tomorrow morning within 24 hours. I have Prime. Yes, I am all about that. That was my biggest takeaway. And that the future is now. These technologies and ideas that like my mom or grandmother may have thought were, oh, that's for then. Like,
Or that's science fiction.
yeah, science fiction. That's what I was looking for.
Now we're at science fact.
Yes. Or like there was a cartoon called The Jetsons, or and they did all of this high tech kind of things, and yeah, it's now. It's not tomorrow. People are already getting like ocular implants and things like that. And I had a client tell me that she actually has an implant, and this was just Thursday. She had an implant in her back that helps send messages to her spine so that she can walk.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I didn't put the two and two together. Transhumanism, there it is.
Body augmentation.
Yes.
I think what really challenges me from a theological standpoint is to understand that this has worldview components, that it is on the horizon as a competitor to the historic Christian worldview. And it's all the more reason for us to be grounded and rooted in our faith and to know what we believe and why we believe it, and to understand how to think about technology in light of the Christian worldview. So
yes, and that what I see as similar between transhumanists and Christians is this idea of utopia, or this idea of being able to live forever in a paradise. And so how do you have that conversation with someone who is a transhumanist and believing in a different worldview?
Because now the materialists have eternal life potentially from their perspective as an option.
Yeah.
It's now an option on the table. So this is why I wanted to bring Fuz on the show, so we could really start to be exposed to these ideas that are going to pose some more obstacles to sharing our faith with people who are not Christians.
Because now I don't have to die in order to get to heaven or the utopia. I can just live forever, and we can continue to make better worlds. And I don't know. That just seems
augment and enhance my body. So good conversation
But you
there.
can't really live forever. I mean, that's the goal.
That's the goal.
Yeah, but they're not there yet.
No, but I mean, I think
I don't think they'll ever get there.
that's the grand vision of the whole thing, and that's the hope. Like Fuz was saying, that's really the hope. So
my hope is that Wonder Woman kit for $19.95 on Prime. Yes, and if you add another little bit to your order for $35 more, it'll come today.
I can't wait.
Amazon
Yeah,
app.
she's already looking on her phone right there.
I'm just
Okay,
saying.
so let's talk about tolerance.
Let's talk about tolerance. This is how you know I am a person who has been saved from the world. If you know that song, I am sorry.
Is that a real song?
It's not tolerance. I can't even believe that song popped into my head. I need to be rebuked, openly rebuked.
Okay.
It's okay. Yes.
Let's talk about
sorry.
tolerance.
I am sorry, internet world. Yes. Let's talk about tolerance. Let's talk about tolerance.
A big buzzword in our culture.
Yes.
So this week we saw a little video, and that's kind of what inspired the conversation.
We saw a video, and then we also listened to I don't know if it was a podcast or if it was a video when I was driving, so I couldn't watch. But either way, there were two things we heard. We're going to start off with the video.
Yeah, so let's play this little video. It's about, I don't know, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and then we're going to make some comments about it. It's kind of a fun little video.
Hi, we're the Al-Amris.
Assalamu alaikum, we're the Jensens.
And we are a Muslim family.
And we're a Latter-day Saint family.
Our kids go to the same school together.
And now we're friends.
Now, there are a lot of things that make us different.
But there are more things that make us similar.
I believe in one God.
And our books are the Bible and the Book of Mormon.
And I believe in one God. And the Quran is my book. As Muslims, alcohol is a no-no.
We also don't drink alcohol, or coffee, or tea.
Not even Arabic coffee?
Sorry.
As Latter-day Saints, we fast the first Sabbath of every month.
For 24 hours, no food or drinks.
And for Muslims, we fast the whole month of Ramadan.
From dawn till sunset.
We donate a percentage of our income to charity.
And we call it zakat.
And we donate a percentage of our income to our church and to charity.
We call it tithing.
And for us, every Friday is special, dedicated for prayer and family.
And we attend church on the Sabbath.
Back home in the US, we observe the Sabbath on a Sunday, but here in the UAE, we observe on Friday.
And if you're a Latter-day Saint and you're able, you're expected to travel to a holy temple sometime in your life.
And for every capable and healthy Muslim, a pilgrimage to Mecca is required.
We call it Hajj.
Today, my family and I were invited by the Jansons to enjoy iftar, the meal that we have as Muslims to break our fast in Ramadan. And what I have learned today from a family of Latter-day Saints who live in a Muslim country is that above all the similarities in our religion is a foundation that we both share. And that is to be good people and to be kind to those around us. Right guys, selfie time. Today I didn't learn about being a good Latter-day Saint, and the Jansons didn't learn about being a good Muslim. What we learned together is the importance of simply being good the best way we know how. Everyone ready? Cheers! And when we look around, we find that and see that in other people. That is what brings us closer together. That is what makes this world a better place. Much love, and God bless you all.
Okay.
That was cute.
It was cute.
It was quaint.
It was-
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about tolerance.
Let's talk about tolerance.
In light of that video. That video actually reminds me a lot of South Africa, because in South Africa, there are many religions, but the main one is either Muslim or Christian. And everybody kind of gets along. Nobody's like, I can't talk to you. You think different than me. I can't talk to you. You go to church more than I do. You know,
or you go to the wrong church.
You go to the wrong church. You wear the wrong clothes. It's just like, hey, I don't believe that. You're a nice person. Let's be friends.
That was your immediate response after we watched the video. You said, "Oh, it's just like South Africa." It reminds me, because in the public schools there,
they'll do the Christian prayer, and then they'll do the Muslim prayer, because every day starts with prayer. Then they'll do the Muslim prayer. It's respectful for both people groups, and then they learn.
It's so interesting, because I think that for many of us, we've forgotten what tolerance even is. So I got a couple dictionary definitions.
Okay.
So let's go to the Merriam-Webster. It's always a good place to start. Tolerance, what is it? Is number 2 there is sympathy or indulgence for beliefs or practices differing from or conflicting with one's own. The act of allowing something.
Yeah.
This is the idea of tolerance, is that you and I have different perspectives. We have different views.
But we don't lose our minds.
We don't lose our minds.
Yes.
And now, just in case you think Merriam-Webster is an anomaly, let's go to the Cambridge Dictionary. Across the pond. Tolerance. Willingness to accept behavior and beliefs that are different from your own, even if you disagree or disapprove of them, which I find to be another very interesting definition.
I like that. Because you can accept something and not necessarily join in on the bandwagon with it. You don't even have to like it, but I can accept that this is where you're at.
Yeah.
And I don't need to change you. I don't need to.
We can still be friends.
Yeah. It doesn't have to impact things to the point where, we can no longer talk and we have to go sit in separate corners.
I think that what's interesting to me about the clip is, in my own experience, I have a very close family member, my brother, who sometimes watches the show, is a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that experience has taught me that many Christians, many historic Protestants, actually don't understand the LDS religion. We have a lot of misconceptions about it. And yet my brother and I completely disagree on certain things. Mm-hmm. We disagree on the Book of Mormon, whether that is a true revelation from God. We disagree on whether or not Joseph Smith is a true prophet. If I had a Muslim friend here, I would disagree with them about whether or not Muhammad was a true prophet. But I think that what I've learned through my friendship and my relationship with my brother is that we could still be friends.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had to learn how to be respectful of each other's differences. And that's what true tolerance is. Like, we don't avoid conversations. And there's been a few moments where I've said, you do realize that we both can't be right. One of us is probably wrong, or we're both wrong, but we both can't be right. But we don't make that the focus of our friendship. And I think in our culture, we've forgotten how to have friendships. We've forgotten how to engage in real tolerance.
I think today it's kind of like people feel like they will catch. It's like a differing belief is like a contagious disease. Like,
I can't be around it.
Don't go over to the Smiths. They're liberal. Don't go over to the Walters. They're Republican.
They voted for Trump.
You know you're gonna come back thinking like them. It's like I can't catch conservatism. I can't catch liberalism. You know, I can't. It's not something you can catch.
But can we have an exchange of ideas? Can we talk about things?
Yes, and still hold your own idea, or here's something new to try on,
or change your mind.
Change your mind.
Yeah. In the Urban Dictionary.
That's my favorite.
I loved this one. So our Urban Dictionary says tolerance, the highest virtue of those who have no deep convictions. It was formerly the respectful exchange of ideas between two parties in spite of significant disagreement on the topic, which I think is the very definition, the traditional definition of tolerance. It has now been distorted by liberals. I don't know who runs the Urban Dictionary, but I thought that was interesting to put in there, by liberals, to demand agreement with, condoning of, and enabling a point of view regardless of the other party's beliefs and convictions. One demanding this brand of tolerance offers no respect for the other party, does not offer either type of tolerance, and often viciously goes on the attack with labels. And I thought, well, that's kind of closer to how our culture thinks about tolerance now, is a lot of name calling. If you don't agree with me, then I call you names. If you don't agree with me, I can't come eat with you at Thanksgiving.
Yes.
I'm going to unfriend you on social media.
And that's the worst.
Yeah.
When you get blocked, you know it's bad. I don't know that I agree that it has now been distorted by liberals. I feel like both sides are kind of, and this isn't a political conversation, but I don't know that I see tolerance being given very kindly in either direction, because you get the wrong one and there it is. There's the name calling, and they're conservative. You get the wrong liberal, and there it is, the name calling.
I think conservative and liberals are equally intolerant of each other. And that's why I thought the video was so great, because it's two religions I totally disagree with.
Right? There it is.
And they disagree with each other. And
yet they're having not coffee or tea, but they're drinking water.
Yeah, but they're having some friendship.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that in thinking about the doctrine of humanity, and what we call in theology, like anthropology, is what do we think about humans? And part of the doctrine of humanity and theology is that we're all created in the image of God, that there should be things that are similar about us, that we find that we can connect with people that have views that differ from our own, because we're connected as human persons, and that every human person has value, dignity, and worth, and that we can find dignity with one another and treat each other in a respectful way, and that true tolerance allows for differences. It doesn't force differences on each other. It allows for free will. It also made me reflect on how the Father relates to us, that our Heavenly Father doesn't coerce us into believing in Him. Our Heavenly Father even allows and respects our free will decisions, even when we turn away from Him.
Yeah.
He doesn't coerce us. He tolerates us, if you will. He tolerates that we have turned away from him. But then he works on our behalf, to continue to love us and to have an open door toward us if we ever repent from our sins and turn back to him. I think that is the parable of the prodigal son, is that picture that there's a way back.
Yeah.
And
I think the thing that stuck with me, and sorry to cut you off.
No, that's good.
I heard this week that intolerance in the name of tolerance solves nothing. If you are being intolerant in order to gain tolerance, or you're being intolerant to help someone else become tolerant, it solves nothing. Tolerance really has to be a two-way street. It really needs to be a two-way street in order for us to come together and to be unified and to hear one another's opinions and differences and grow from that place. There has to be the grace for tolerance.
And I think that's a good word, is that tolerance does require a lot of grace. It requires us to kind of believe the best about each other on some level, to try to engage in understanding. Even if someone is my, quote unquote, my religious enemy, in that they have a different religious perspective than I do, I still have an obligation as a Christian to find out what love looks like for that person. I still have an obligation not to violate their humanity and speak curses over them. Even if they've spoken curses over me, even if they want to kill me, I still have an obligation to love them and to figure out what does love look like for that person. And I think that is one of the greater struggles that we as Christians have, that tolerance in the Christian worldview is what we need, because at some point we might be in the minority religion. Mm-hmm. So we want to advocate for what I call more of a traditional view of tolerance. But it's our culture has shifted into a different kind of tolerance altogether. And I just thought, this is good, because we don't want to throw away the word tolerance just because it's been captured by some people, some ideologies, and it's become coercive.
Yeah.
There is a Christian idea of tolerance that is important, that reflects free will, that allows people to disagree with us and allows for people to change their minds, just as the Father allows us to change our mind toward him. So along those lines, it's time for the tweet of the week.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
The tweet of the week.
Yeah. Okay.
I got nothing. It's so it's so dramatic. It's very extra, as the teenager would say. It's very extra. Okay, let's, since we were on tolerance, I thought this was a good tweet to kind of tie into that conversation. Sean McDowell tweeted this, I think it was earlier today, actually. Apple sent this to Life Site News, a leading pro-life organization, after canceling their channel. Your channel's been disabled. Your content has been removed from Apple News. Your channel didn't comply with Apple guidelines. Channel shows intolerance toward a specific point of view. And thank you very much. Regards, the Apple News team. So I thought this was interesting because this is, well, first of all, LifeSite is a pro-life Catholic, pro-life news site. Mm-hmm. And it was offered, if you ever notice on your iPhone, there's like a news button, mm-hmm, where you can subscribe to the news aggregate of your choice.
Yes.
And LifeSite was one of the news aggregates. So you could subscribe to CNN or Fox or whatever. And then LifeSite News was one of the news aggregates. So basically Apple told LifeSite, you're not going to be on our news aggregate anymore. And because their news of pro-life news violated their community
Well, I
guidelines.
think that it is just increasing or becoming increasingly more difficult for Christians to be able to put things out because of the stance against abortion or the stance against LGBTQ and not even against, but just a different point of view. And so if it doesn't align with what culture says it must align and look like, then you are intolerant. And I think more and more Christians are just becoming labeled as intolerant, and the world or current culture is asking for this tolerance and this acceptance. And I think that is a problem.
But it's through coercion.
Through coercion, but it's not even tolerance, it's the acceptance. And I think we're missing and mixing those two words. So culture is not asking me as a Christian to become tolerant of their view, which would be to accept even though I disagree with. Culture is asking me now to accept despite what I believe.
That's really well stated. And because I think that has become the definition of tolerance in our culture is acceptance. And we're not going to really have real tolerance where we're going to allow for different points of view and just say, I disagree with you and here's why. Let me give you some reasons. Then I'm going to hear your reasons for your position. And then we're going to have back and forth about our reasons. And I might persuade you to some things and you might persuade me to other things. And that's what real tolerance is, that we have a free exchange of ideas. We have free will to change our minds or not change our minds. But where we're going now in our culture is you must accept certain points of view. Otherwise, you will not be part of the public conversation anymore.
Yes, you are the bad guy. You are the enemy. You are intolerant. You are racist. You
hate
are speech. Yes. All of these names get assigned to people when they choose not to accept something that goes against their worldview.
Yeah. And I think that there is my upgrades. I don't know about any upgrades I've got in the wardrobe department there, Rhyme His Songs. Maybe it's the shirt. I borrowed my teenager Snoopy shirt.
Wait, get back to what you were saying, because we just sometimes we get derailed and sidetracked.
I know. I like the comments. So
it is. It's kind of like Squirrel.
Yeah.
If you saw that movie.
Okay. All right, going back.
Yes.
I think that Christians at some point are going to have to start counting the cost, and I think many of us who work in the public are starting to count the cost, so that we can wake up one morning and know that our content has been completely deleted from YouTube. I know that every day. I know that my YouTube account could get censored. I know that my Facebook account could get censored. And that is the world in which we live. Because the historic or traditional definition of tolerance, where we're actually going to allow for a diversity of voices and opinions, and we're going to allow for free exchange of ideas and free will changes. We're going to live peaceably with one another and in friendship, and we're going to have real coexistence where we find connections in our humanity. I think that we're rapidly going toward a place where Christians are going to have to count the cost. They're going to have to understand that we are rapidly becoming second-class citizens, and that there will be a certain price to pay for that.
Yeah.
So anyways, it's hard times. Things are shifting. This whole show is kind of, maybe a theme of the show has been shifting times, talking about transhumanism and the emergence of that, and the shift in ideas related to tolerance. But that's why Monique and I are trying to advocate for the historic Christian worldview. Because like Fuz said earlier, we actually think that the solution lies in going back to something very ancient.
Yeah.
That we don't need new ethics. We don't need a progressive theology. What we really need is to return to the true Christian faith. And Monique and I are trying to create a space here where we can explore uncomfortable topics, but through the lens of the historic Christian worldview. what does it all mean, and how can we help our kids make sense of it. So let's see. Rhyme His Songs said, everybody is threatened by opposing arguments. Geez, the apple truly jacks up the life site, even in Genesis. I think
there's that.
making a reference back to Genesis 3. But yes, there are definitely a recycling of beliefs, and there's no new heresies, just old heresies in spacesuits, as my old seminary theology professor used to say. So
there it is. All right.
Well,
are we done?
I think we're done. So we posted a new video this week. We should probably let everyone know about.
Yes.
Why don't you tell them about that? The critical race theory one.
That's the one.
That's the one.
So we watched a video by Pastor Eric Mason. I believe he's Dr. Eric Mason.
Yeah, he's the author of the Woke Church book.
Woke Church book. He has a church out in, I believe it's Chicago. And he gave a speech at the MLK 50 tribute. And we just watched the video and reviewed it.
Offered some comments,
and just gave our take on how critical race theory is really coming into the church, and how it's even coming down from the pulpit, and what that looks like. And then, what are other options that people can have, or what does the gospel really say?
Just trying to continue the woke church movement episode that we had some weeks ago, and continuing that conversation. I had a lot of people asking me like, well, what does it sound like if my church is starting to drift into this? And so we thought, well, this would be a good way to show people rather than tell them, okay, here's what some of the words start sounding like, and if some of the common phrases and that sort of thing. But also we want to try to strike a balance between, let's not have any race conversations and just pretend like race conflict is not even a thing.
Because God knows that's not the answer, people. That is
we can't do that.
The answer.
But then we don't want to make everything about race. And so Monique and I are trying to find this kind of third way of how do we speak about this biblically, believing in the sufficiency of Scripture, and
not tear one another down because you're white or because I'm black. Take responsibility and actually have a stand in the conversation, and know that critical race theory, even with like a good point that it could, propose, there's so much negative to it that it needs to be redone.
Yeah.
Or actually, better yet, Christians need to speak up and speak out and give an option and a way that is so different from critical race theory that the world would adopt it, instead of the church adopting the stance of critical race theory from the world. That's my thought.
So go check out our video on critical race theory. Is critical race theory, I forget what the title was, coming into the church or something like that.
Yeah.
But
it's there.
It's there. Go look.
Maybe we'll put a link to it in the show notes on this video. Yeah. That's what we'll do.
Definitely. And speaking of the show notes, go check out the show notes. Go to theologymom.com/allthethings. You can find all the past episodes along with links to additional resources that we mentioned on the show, books, videos, and for further study, just to try to help make this hopefully the show is becoming a launching point for people to dig in deeper to their faith and explore the current cultural conversations in light of the Christian worldview. So that's really what we're aiming for. And the show notes are there. You can also check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. If you don't have time to watch the video that week, just go catch the podcast.
Yeah, listen to it while you drive.
That's right. Or listen to it again.
There's that.
Connect with us on social media, The Real Monique D on Twitter.
Saying just one new Twitter person and I will tweet. I promise.
Okay. And you can connect with me everywhere at Theology Mom. So I think that's it for now.
That's a wrap, folks.
That's a wrap. We look forward to your feedback about the show, and we hope you enjoyed it. It was a great time. Our friend Rhyme His Song says, thanks, B-Team. You are the A team in my book. Great show. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good week.
Bye.
God bless.
There's nothing left.